Good afternoon, everybody. I'm here with Secretary Geurts, the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition. And like I said at the last Facebook Live event, you can't get rid of me. Even though I had my retirement event, we've got a Facebook Live today and another one tomorrow. Awesome. So I'm dragging my feet as I go out. Not really, but anyway. So today we're going to talk about how small businesses can contribute to naval warfighting success. And the last time I interviewed you was back in April of last year. I just pretty much started the job, and that was my first Facebook Live. And it's been about a year and a half later. And can you tell us what's happened in that year and a half?
Yeah, it's been a busy year and a half. Thanks for having these, Emily, and thanks for your service. I'm sure I'm speaking for a lot of small businesses out there. You really made a big difference for our Navy, and part of the reason I think we've had such good success over the last at least 18 months since I've been here. I would look at it from a couple different dimensions. I think we have demonstrated our ability to move at speed and scale across a broad part of the enterprise. We've demonstrated how to bring small businesses more effectively in. I think our numbers last year were, north of $15 billion direct to small business. Some of the highest small business rates I think the Navy's seen for a long time. But most importantly, I think in the eyes of the fleet, they are seeing capabilities faster. They're seeing capabilities more affordably. They're seeing us really focusing on the mission and bringing some new things to the table, as well as some new ways of thinking to the table. Our challenge is really how to do that at scale. Across, last year the Navy had 250,000 contract actions, and so it's $110 billion worth of work. So there's a lot of work to do, and so my focus kind of this year is the vectors are in the right direction. Now, how do we do that at scale across all the various activities across the Navy, and take best practices and more quickly replicate them across the service?
So that's what your Naval X is about?
Naval X is part of that. Many of you have heard kind of that announcement. With Naval X, what I found in the Navy were great pockets of innovation and a lot of folks working hard, but not connected as well as they could have been, and not learning from each other kind of at the speed we need to. Okay. And so I found a lot of folks discovering things and trying to invent things as opposed to taking advantage of things. So part of that already exists and exploiting. So part of Naval X is internal. How do we connect up all the various pockets of innovation and new ways of thinking in the Navy? And part of it's external. How do we create nodes where anybody who's got ideas can connect into the Navy and more quickly get them in front of the person or persons that might be interested in it, so to kind of reduce the cost to get new capabilities in front of the right folks in the Navy more quickly.
So one quick issue here is that I can't see the questions. Okay, now I can see the questions. Okay, so yeah, let us know that you're here live, and I'm holding the phone. What we used to do is have Christine pass me the questions, and sometimes they come in so fast that it's just easier for me to look down at the phone and see what the questions are. So if you have a question, go ahead and
streamlining.
Streamlining the process, and go ahead and ask it, and let us know that you're listening as well. So where do you think that there's work still to be done, and what are the biggest challenges that you see in the next year or the next 3 to 5 years?
So I still think it's too hard for folks with solutions or ideas to get them in front of the right person.
Yes.
We're a big organization. We've got more than 60,000 acquisition professionals in the Navy and the Marine Corps. We're spread out across a long distance, and so my real goal is how do we reduce the cost to get to the person to get feedback or make a decision. Right. And so the faster I can get an idea and see it, and the more cheaply folks can bring those forward, the more ideas we can look at, and the more we can go. So I think that's an element. Training the workforce to really understand how to leverage small business as an enabler, not as an imperative, kind of as a kind of quota thing, and really setting up acquisition programs to leverage the strength of small business is I think a challenge and opportunity. And then to create these programs with more complex strategies, meaning it's not just, is it going to be a competition, small business or big business or cost plus or fixed price? It can be a program with say a prime contractor, but doing it with an architecture that allows small businesses to come in and out. It allows us to bring in new players anytime there's a new idea and kind of get away from a one set piece decision, which lasts for the 30 years of a weapons system.
Yeah,
that's where I think there's a lot of opportunity. Small businesses doing great in service support and kind of service kind of industries. I think they're doing well in some of the innovative research. We have not yet figured out how to fully utilize their unique skills in some of the larger, more traditional programs.
Right.
So some of the things we're doing, like in digital twins and creating open architectures to reduce the barriers to entry, I think are going to be really, really important as we move forward.
So can you create open architectures? You're doing it on ships. It's easier maybe to do it on a ship than it is for an aircraft. Do you have to start with a brand new aircraft in order to have that open architecture?
No, and I don't think it's a open or shut.
Okay.
There's various pieces and parts, and again, some of it is in sustainment. It could be using new technology. It's too much we think of everything in acquisition as strictly something new, like a big weapon. We're spending a lot of money in sustainment, and that's another area where new ideas, new approaches, new technologies can help us reduce the cost of ownership. If we're going to get to a 355 ship Navy and be able to sustain it, we're going to have to change the game from our current approach. We just don't have the money to do things in the way we've always done it to be successful. And that's where I'm hoping both, one of the things we did was make all the deputy program managers kind of the small business advocate, so that they're constantly looking within those programs for opportunities. And to some of the larger primes' credit, they're understanding if they make a system that allows that constant influx, they're going to be more attractive.
Right.
And so, it's not just the Navy requiring it, it's a lot of the larger primes helping us think through ways, because that will make their platform or program more attractive to the Navy.
So did you just implement a new, I think it's a gate review to look at sustainment?
Yeah, so one of the things we did, we had a very, two things we're looking at. We had a very disciplined way to start programs and kind of work through execution. And then we kind of got them in the field and then kind of turned them over to the fleet and then moved on sometimes to the next thing. And that in our gate review process is where the CNO and I look at programs together, him from the fleet or her from the fleet perspective, me from the acquisition perspective. We have now added, the challenge is once you went into production, you kind of stop doing reviews and then turn it over to the fleet. And if you're not careful, then that could kind of stagnate because everybody's focus turns. And so we've now added a gate review for systems that are fielded to look for ways to open up those systems for new ideas, new thoughts, potentially small business, make sure we're not in an OEM kind of lock where it doesn't make sense to have the OEM potentially being the sole provider in those systems. So I think that will allow us to bring constantly new technology into a system, not just new technology at the kind of onset of a program.
So someone had mentioned that they were going to submit this question, so I'll just ask it anyway because we were discussing it. So sometimes the fleet, the fleet has science advisors and they're always looking for new technology and stuff like that. So what if the fleet finds a technology and they like a technology that a certain company has? What's the process for the fleet getting that on contract, especially if it's something that they can't buy with a purchase card? What do they have to do in order to be able to have the money to buy that?
Yeah, so I think it's great having science advisors out there, and the best thing in the world is to get products out into the fleet's hands to experiment with and try with. Sometimes it's really challenging to write a requirement before you've actually had something in your hands to think about the concept of. So I think that's a powerful equation. The challenge, though, is we we contract for those at scale, kind of through the program offices and through the PEOs. And so if you're experimenting with the fleet, that's great. I would just ensure that you're also linking back to the program office or the PEO or the technology office, so that they can give you a thought on, what's the scalability of this, when do we have that requirement programmed in, and that way you aren't misinformed in terms of time to market or when we've got opportunities to get to market.
Right, because the fleet may like something, but then they've got to get that money in the budget to buy it.
And so we're working hard to get agility. So not everything is a 2-year process to wait for the next POM. So that's why it's one of the things we're really trying to do is close the distance between the fleet, the acquisition folks, and the technologist folks and industry.
Right.
So a lot of our our recent naval technology exercise, the ANTEX events, advanced both the Navy and Marine Corps, things on probably leading the DoD in terms of getting actual technology and companies out to the operating forces, but also having the acquisition folks there and the development folks. Because sometimes there are things we need to do to modify a product to bring it in beyond just a kind of a commercial version of it.
Okay.
And then sometimes we will find uses for a product that the product owner didn't think of.
Right.
And so those are all, part of what we're trying to work on the acquisition side is speed that cycle. So if the fleet does identify something of need, it's not a value of death multi-year process. We can, both from a contracting and a resourcing aspect, move that forward. We've got things called, ARPEDs and some of these rapid prototyping and exploitation kind of things. And so I would just make sure if you're out there working with a fleet, continue to kind of, if you're on the industry side, link back to the program team or work with your fleet counterpart to make sure they're linking back
to the program team.
So that we have knowledge on the acquisition side, so we can start, if it's something of use that we need to get out in the field, that we're aware of it.
Right. Because we have separation of responsibilities. The fleet doesn't have the authority to sign a contract for something.
Right.
So, okay, let me see if we have some questions. Hi, Leslie. I see that you're watching. Gary, thanks for this. Come on, guys. You got to ask some questions.
Here's kind of one from the side.
Here we go. Kurt, what changes are being made to the acquisition process, the FAR, to allow for an effective change in the current process? The current acquisition process, I think.
So I think, the FAR actually has, the Federal Acquisition Regulations, actually has a lot more flexibility than we exploit. So I think there are some things in the FAR that we're going to continue to change our ability to make kind of micro threshold press, award contracts with less baggage if they're small kind of prototype stuff. We're looking at non-FAR based contracts like OTAs, but also there are lots of things we can do within the FAR and still be very fast.
Right.
My previous job at Special Operations Command, almost all of our contracts were FAR based contracts, but we were very fast and agile with that. What I would also say though is I've noticed it's got to be balanced, and so we can move quickly. In certain cases, our industry partners are not positioned also to move as fast as we want to. And so if you're in industry and there's things you want to do faster or opportunities, I'm all ears. Just make sure that as we move our process up, that you're ready to move at our speed, because we, one of the things for small businesses in particular, we want to make sure if we hire you for a contract, you're successful.
Definitely.
And the worst that can happen is if you've got a small business, we push to go do something fast, and then you aren't positioned well to execute, then that doesn't, that doesn't help us get to where we need to get to. So having an honest, frank dialogue of what's fast enough, and understanding our speed and your speed to execute once we get going, and we've got to make sure that's balanced out.
Yeah, because don't bite off more than you can chew or swallow.
Yeah, and part of what we're also, working to break some contracts down into smaller bits. So if you haven't worked with the Navy, we can get you in, start working with the Navy, understand how we work, we can understand you, and then build up some past performance so that you can continue to compete. On the other hand, we've been awarding major several $100 million contracts to small businesses. Some of our newest ships are being built as small business set-aside contracts, and they've been very, very successful. And so, but that's built up after a history of performance, and they're in a position to succeed when they award.
Yeah. What are your concerns regarding small businesses and cybersecurity? Or do you have any?
Yeah, I think we're working hard across the industrial base to create standards that are meaningful and that are achievable and don't drive huge amounts of cost in. I mean, quite frankly, we have competitors that every day are challenging our networks. And so, the first thing we're trying to work with is using the NIST and some of these other things, what's a reasonable standard of, I'll call, cyber hygiene. If you're in a high-risk area, that's a high-threat area, then that may be an area where we'll work with you and, fund some more sophisticated cyber strategies. But the first thing we all need to do is get up to that kind of basic level of cyber hygiene.
Right.
The things you would do for your phone, the things you do for your data at home, because we've got a very dynamic and thoughtful competitor, and they're probing for any opportunity to get there. Secondly, so the way I kind of think of it, eventually we kind of like we do for quality, right? So we have ISO 9000 or a quality standard. You know what the standard is. You can get trained on that standard. And then once you've reached that standard, it's just maintaining it. That's kind of the mindset we have for cyber, and try and not, drive a lot of cost or complexity into the system. But there are some expectations of, some basic cyber hygiene to protect this data, because, I'm worried about it from a national defense standpoint. As a company or industry partner, you ought to be worried about it from a competition and survival in the marketplace. And if we've got lax practices in the enterprise, that can create threats much more broad than just a specific company. And that's what we're kind of really focusing on.
And if there is a breach, report it, though. Hiding something doesn't get better with time.
Yeah, it doesn't help me if you've had an issue.
Yeah.
Because what we need to do is make sure we can help you limit the exposure.
Right.
And then take the right steps to move forward. Right. And I will put a shout out to a lot of companies, big and small. I've been partnering with us, and I've seen a marked improvement. And I think have some tools available, both in terms of expertise, training, or third-party views that can be leveraged by small business or big business.
Right. Remind me, Christine, we'll put the DoD has a procurement toolbox. We'll put a link to that in the comments here, because they do have some good PowerPoint presentations and stuff on cyber on that procurement toolbox.
But if you don't know where to start with the basic level of hygiene, and then we can help from there.
Okay. Question: who would be the best person to contact to share a new storage of gas? This is a new technology. I've contacted several people, even small business specialists, but none never seem to get the right one to share our idea. And that is a challenge, because we're such a large organization. It's hard sometimes, even for me. I've worked for the Navy for 38 years to figure out where to send somebody. So sometimes it does take a little bit of hunting around. But
yeah, I would say two resources. Continue to work with the Small Business Office. They are very networked, and we've been, I would say, one thing both Emily and I have been working hard over the last 18 months is kind of close the distance between the small business offices and the acquisition teams.
Right.
And getting that kind of shared knowledge. The other one, particularly if it's a technology area, if you go on the Office of Naval Research on their website, maybe that's something else you can add. We actually have a list of appointed contacts, email, phone numbers in different technology areas.
Right.
And that's also a pretty good first step if you're not sure who to contact.
And I think one thing that we can do better within the government is if the answer is no, or we don't have a need, and we need to say that sooner rather than later. I think that's a message we can get out a little better too, because sometimes we could, it's money to the company to be kind of passed around. So, and sometimes people don't want to tell the company, no, we don't have a need for your for your product. But if the answer is no, that's a valuable answer to the company, and then they know where else, try to figure out someone else that they should go talk to.
Absolutely. A little known fact is, as I was waiting to go on active duty, I worked for a small business IT firm for 9 months. So
Right. So you know what I mean? You'd rather have the no.
Yeah. The other thing is, across the DoD more broadly, we're looking at, you may have heard of a tool called Vulcan or some other tools where we can share knowledge about different technologies or solution spaces or industry opportunities more broadly. So you don't have to do all the footwork if you talk to an Army person for us to go find the same data in the Navy. Right. And so I would say that's in its early stages. But I am sensitive to reducing the cost to get potential solutions exposed to a broader set of audience than just kind of one by one.
Right. Yeah, I think that we definitely need to use technology to do that. And I think that we could also possibly use, I know we can't use Zoom, but we could use like Defense Connect, or there's a way of, meeting with companies so that they don't have to travel out to see us. Balancing security with, sharing information like we are now. So, Chris, I see that you asked your question, and earlier Secretary Geurts and I discussed it and answered it. So hopefully that helps you with that question. That's to Chris Williams. The best person storage of gas we got. Do innovation projects gain more interest within your offices if there's a good potential civilian use case as well because of your involvement and expertise? So I think, does it have to be just military?
Yeah, no, and it absolutely doesn't have to be just military. And in fact, opportunity space, I would say, for the Department of the Navy is better leveraging a close commercial counterpart than a perfect Navy part. It depends on the application, obviously. Part of what we're, the Navy has been, very successful, I'd say, in the SBIR program, particularly in phase 3 SBIRs, kind of leading the DoD. But I'm looking at taking a hard look at our small business innovative research approach to make sure we are leveraging that to our full stability. Some of that deals with understanding where there's opportunities to co-fund or create some of these more interesting, more like an accelerator model. We don't want to do that for all of SBIR because there's a lot of basic and applied early research we need to keep doing. But coming up with a way, taking lessons from some of the other services, some of the other agencies that are employing SBIR-like models, and making sure we're strategic and always looking for win-win opportunities, either where we're the only person in a market space and we need the new technology and we're the ones to develop it, or opportunities to use innovation to quickly adapt an existing commercial or close to commercial product for a new application in the military.
It seems like it's less expensive to quickly adapt something that's available commercially than developing it on our own. So.
Yeah, I think, and again, depends on the case. But my favorite form of R&D is rip off and deploy. So if it's if it's there and we can take it as is and get it to the field quickly, I'm very incentivized to do that.
Don't know if you want to answer this question on it. Is there growing concern about Chinese investment in our small business industrial base? And if so, what are you all doing about it?
I would say maybe one level above that. I am very worried about the fragility of our supplier base, whether that's in traditional kind of known product, things, gears and engines and air conditioner plants and valves, and as well as in emerging tech. And so I'm spending a lot of my personal energy really looking at that closely and understanding where we've got fragility, where we've got potential vulnerabilities, not just from a foreign investment standpoint, but vulnerabilities from hey, is the market out there? Have we signaled where we need to do? In the case of, say, our submarine enterprise, we're going through a massive growth.
Right.
You probably saw in the news, put about $500 million on contract for our suppliers, targeted at suppliers to get them ready to help us, deliver all these submarines we've got coming forward. Part of that also is making sure we understand vulnerability from the financial position of those companies, from the technology, from all the different aspects. And so, rather than just focus on, one country's threat in that particular area, I'd say, yeah, I'm worried about suppliers. And part of what we're also trying to do is we tend to not do as good a job as we need to forecasting demand and showing, in particular, in some of the hardware enterprises, where do we have demand for a part in new construction, in spares, and in repairs. We each one of those gets talked about separately. And so as we can communicate more clearly with industry where those demand signals are,
then
that can show you where we both got to grow, or there's potential for second and third sources and new entrants into the market.
Because I'm sure you're also concerned when we have like just one source. And let's say that source is located in Kansas, where maybe there's a tornado or something.
Yeah, so I look at fragility in all of its, whether it's we need a certain workforce skill set, or whether it's in one particular location, or we had a lot of challenges when we had a fire at a plant that produced propellers.
That would be a challenge.
And so, we only had one source. And so a lot of, and then trying to signal where those opportunities are for industry.
Right.
So we can get new entrants into the market.
So here's a question: to enable small business to participate in the Department of Navy marketplace with innovative ideas, the Navy needs to share detailed information on program requirements and needs. The current environment is trending toward the DoD not sharing information, CUI. We understand the need for security, but it needs to be balanced. The DoD 5200 is not currently aligned to the NARA implementing regulations. The result is overprotection of all of the data and a failure at the working level to share information. This is due to a lack of understanding of the requirements at a working level across DoD and industry. Are efforts being made to align the DoD to the, I don't know what NARA is, I don't know if you do, and NARA regulations. Kurt, maybe you can expand on that. But I think your concern is just we're not sharing enough of the detail of the requirements.
Yeah, so it's a balance, like many things. And so to just share to everybody in the world, including our competitors, the detailed thing we need or the detailed problem we have is problematic. To share with nobody, or only the one or two people we need, is problematic, because we may not then find. So I think it's a good question. I think some of the ways we're trying to get at it is in the OTA space, having consortiums where we have a broad but somewhat controlled group, and some of it is looking at our solicitations and, to some degree, understanding here's generally what we're thinking. If you're interested, come talk to us. And then maybe having, to your point, it can be talk virtually. It doesn't have to be everybody fly to Washington. And then if we can understand that you have a reasonable capability in that space, provide more detailed information, or so but I'm open to ideas. I'm not sure I have the right solution. We do need to be careful in this day and age that we don't kind of decide to put nothing out there, because we'll miss opportunities. It's another reason a lot of these where we have either at Naval X days where we've got kind of seaside talks, or where we're getting together, and or where we have kind of these naval experiments or Marine Corps experiments, because then we can bring folks who are genuinely interested together and have a discussion, as opposed to anybody, including our competitors, having that discussion.
And I think, I could be wrong, but I think that those experiment opportunities are advertised in like a broad agency announcement on Fed Biz Ops. And maybe a thought is to advertise them in other places as well, because I don't know that some of the non-traditionals know to go to look at FBO.
Yeah, I think to your point, the two areas where I think we have opportunities to improve, better communicating our longer range needs, and then creating the forum where we can have a more specific discussion, but in a reasonably controlled environment, or controlled to the point that it needs to be controlled. Not everything needs to be, are two good things to keep working on.
Right. Okay. Someone asked, will there be an increase of opportunities for small business set-asides? Is there a small business point of contact small businesses can interface with? And my answer to that question is that if you look at our YouTube channel, we have several different videos from these Facebook Lives. And one of them that we did is how to be procurement ready and how to do business with the Department of the Navy. And we answer that question because the Department of the Navy has 10 different buying commands, and each of them has a small business professional, and each of them buys different things. So that's the answer to that question.
But a good place to start would be from that list, contacting the small business representative.
Right, of that command.
Of that command, and then that can start getting you involved in that.
Yep, that's your first foot in the door because they understand the culture of that command. They can help you determine where you fit. So if a company is interested in working on an accelerated timeline prototypes for the Navy, what are the best avenues to do so?
So we are continuing, I would say, to hone our skills on rapid prototyping. A couple of great avenues are these advanced naval technology experiments, where we had one on the future of amphibious landing, and it was everything from sensors to support equipment to quadcopter or whatever. And so that is one element. If you have a product that you're interested in and have a mission area, we can align it that way. We've really been working hard on cooperative R&D agreements. So somebody had the question about a commercialized piece of equipment. That's another great way. Hey, if you have a piece of equipment, you want us to go test it, or you need some data to see if it would be useful in an application. That's a very quick way, and our cooperative R&D agreement numbers have gone way up. And then the last, or another one is, I think, this Naval X. And given Naval, so we're kind of pioneering this kind of concept called tech bridges, where if you think of Naval X as a set of franchises across our whole community, and then anywhere in the node, if somebody has a piece of equipment or a prototype or something they're interested in, they can click into that network. And even if the person you're talking to isn't the one particularly interested, they know how to connect. And then finally, again, looking at our SIBR program, looking for opportunities within that program, not only to do the basic research, but actually work all the way through prototypes. And then if there's something that's of need, rapidly field that.
Yep. So let's see. This question is, the dynamics between top-tier venture capital firms in Silicon Valley and the government are strained. How is the Navy working with top-tier VCs to create, amplify success stories, and inspire confidence that the Navy and broader DoD are open for business?
Yeah, it's again a somewhat complex question. We could probably do a whole show on that. The best way, I guess, I have seen that is trying to illuminate the potential market and provide visibility into what the potential market may be. May not be a guaranteed market, but understanding that, and then create forum where applicable, where the VC and the Navy can get together and jointly look at something. We may want to invest in it for different reasons or different purposes, but we should at least be aware of what the other is doing. The value in a lot of the government kind of funding, SIBR and some of these, kind of emerging funds is it's non-dilutive kind of funding. And so that's can provide some advantages depending on where you are in the product cycle. The obviously advantages of VCs is generally larger funds, a little bit earlier on risk. And then I think the last piece is we're, I think, open, but trying to be even more open to take things as early as possible in the cycle, get them in the field, test them, and give feedback. And we have a great, we have our sailors and Marines are just amazing. If you put gear in their hands, they'll try things out and give you feedback right away. And so part of what I'm really trying to work on is incentivizing and creating the pathways so that prototypes or wherever they're coming from can quickly get in the hands of the fleet, give feedback, and then to your point earlier, not wait 5 years to tell you we're interested or not.
Right. And if they say we're interested, then the making sure that they have somebody that can award the contract and that they have the funding, because they might want something, like my kids want a lot of stuff.
Well, yeah,
they did when they were little, but there wasn't funding for that.
Well, that's our challenge, right? And so, we're always balancing speed with, efficiency across the Navy. And we've got to understand that piece. But there's also, there's a lot of demands on the Navy. There's a lot of opportunities in the Navy. The faster we can get together and kind of close down that distance, the better.
Right. Okay, I've lost my questions again. Maybe you can help. So, is there anything that keeps you up at night?
There's not much that keeps me up at night, but there's a lot of stuff I wake up thinking about. And part of that is I'm an iteration speed guy. And so I think a lot about velocity, right? So it's not just going fast, it's going fast in the right direction and getting our iteration speed up, that speed of decision making, that speed of information flow, that's trust, and that there is what's really challenging is when you have to fight and be ready to fight every night, being also open to thinking about things you haven't considered or be ready to fight 10 years from now.
Yeah.
And that's really where I think, again, small business can play to agree that, the stuff that really I wake up thinking hard about is how do I reduce the friction from somebody's good idea to the right person to look at it?
Yeah.
And if we can get that exchange cost down and exchange speed up, then that will incentivize more and more ideas coming.
Right.
The challenge in that, again, I'd like to reduce the cost because not all ideas are great ones, or they may be great ideas, just not ones for the Navy at this point in time. And so we've got to have trust to have a honest, objective conversation on both ends of that. So going faster doesn't mean we're going to select everything.
Right.
And so getting that speed, acting with a sense of urgency at the entire enterprise level, not just in the government, but amongst industry, amongst licensing folks who might want to do something overseas. Just getting the organizational speed is really important to me. And then the second, we've got a Navy that's got a pretty large portfolio, and it's a vast array of products. So everything from the world's most complex aircraft carrier that takes 48 million man hours to build to small consumable items that we want to buy really quickly in their technology cycle and then discard. And so the biggest challenge, I think, on the government side of that equation is getting an organization that's good at both.
Yeah.
You can be good at one or good at the other. We've got to be good at both. To be good at both means we've got to have a lot of partners with a vast array of talents, and then the trust that we can operate at speed with those partners to deliver to the fleet.
And then I know we're looking at the workforce because people like me are getting older, leaving, retiring. So we got to make sure we've got that's another part of the challenge is that, as people turn over, then some of that knowledge gets lost. So we really try to capture that knowledge and, make sure that it's my responsibility to make sure that people can come up and replace me and that there's no gap.
Yep. It's a challenge and opportunity.
Yep. Christine, could I use your phone? Because this one is not showing me the questions. Yes. So Here's a question. Asymmetric threats, IEDs, sniper, now drones, change the way battles are fought and won. Rapid fielding of new technology is critical to bridge the 18 to 24 month gap with program of records to address the threat. What flexible acquisition processes can be leveraged today to protect the warfighters in these situations? And as that technology matures, how can it be built into program of records to reduce the Navy's overall cost of execution?
Yeah, that's back to the question I wake up thinking every morning about. That's a pretty good encapsulation of that question. Where we're spending a lot of time on the acquisition programs is you can focus a little too much on the discovery element of things and discover a bunch of things, but if you can't figure out how to get it into programs, you get it into the field.
Yeah.
Whether it's a program record or not doesn't necessarily matter. Then it doesn't do a lot of good. You've just discovered a lot of things, but haven't been able to use it. So I think a lot about speed to field. That's not speed to discover.
Mm-hmm.
And and we're spending a lot of energy with some great success on looking at our acquisition programs, both architecturally from a technology and architecturally from a business standpoint, which would then allow us to quickly bring technology in. So for instance, on a nuclear submarine, I think about what's wet different than what I think about what's dry.
Mm-hmm.
So on the submarine hull that I want to last for decades, we probably need to take some time and make sure we do that right, and we've got lives at stake and whatnot. For the software algorithm inside, I want that to move at the speed of heat.
Yeah.
And so on our submarine enterprise, we're thoughtful about changing the hull. We're changing the software about every 18 months and the hardware about every 36 months.
Right.
And so it's an example of you can take a large program that will last a long time, but you can create architectures that allow you to get to that speed of relevance. And if we have to change something quickly, what we're doing on our Aegis systems with digital twins
Mm-hmm.
and being able to virtualize the entire system and potentially have 2 or 3 versions of that system operating at the same time on a platform, then could allow you to not only have your combat certified through operational test system, but 2 or 3 other experimental ones where you're looking at new algorithms or solving a fleet problem.
Right. I've sat in meetings where they're talking about that. That's pretty interesting because that way you can don't have to put the whole fleet down to try to test something.
Correct.
You can just test it on that digital twin and know if it'll work or not.
And one of the keys to that is decentralizing the operation. We've had a recent example on our F-18 IR surveillance and targeting pods. We were doing a traditional kind of Block 1, Block 2 program down at the at the kind of 05 squadron commander level and program manager level. They came up with a way to take algorithms. We were going to wait for the Block 2 version, get them into the airplane, and Block 1 accelerated by about 4.5 years. Now, it wasn't everything we wanted in the next block, but it was what the user really needed. We did that for about $300,000. And so that's, it's not just a resourcing issue. It's a closing that distance between end user, acquisition person, technologist. That's how you work along a long strategic timeline with tactical relevance.
Right. And that we're going to have to do more things like that in order to be able to afford the number of ships that we need and number of aircraft.
So one thing industry can help in that regard, we are building tremendously complex systems. They're amazingly capable. They can be very complex to operate and train and very hard to maintain. And so another area where technology is something like artificial intelligence, which can be done by very small companies. You don't have to invent it. You can just reinvent how we display it to the operator, how we train it, how we, Google Maps is a great example of, it doesn't take a tremendous amount of training to learn how to use Google Maps or whatever company maps, but there's a tremendous amount of complexity behind it. And so using these technologies to reduce the training pipeline or maintenance pipeline, our shipyards right now, the over 50% of the workforce has less than 5 years experience.
Yeah.
You could look at that as a weakness, or you could look at that as a strength.
Right.
right?
Because they won't be saying, well, we always do it this way.
We always did it that way, right? The challenge is, how do I get them to have the equivalence of 15 or 20 years experience without waiting 15 or 20 years?
Right.
And some of that can be using technology to help train, to simplify, assist in decision-making, all those kinds of things. It's a really interesting time.
So if a company thinks that they have a better way to do training, and they should, I guess, Training Systems Division Orlando.
Yeah, or talk to the
Or
program teams.
talk to the
Yeah.
program teams.
Or, I mean, if you're a small business, you can interject directly to the government, or you can get with the companies.
Right. The
Right.
larger
So, yeah,
companies.
so if you've got a new way that you think we could train shipyard workers, talking to the shipyard,
Mhm.
you know, they are all searching for new ways to do business. We're demanding it. They're on very aggressive, just on our carriers, you know, an 82% learning curve for the next 3 carriers. So they are all looking for legs up on a way to bring new technology in to do things in different and new and more affordable and fast manner.
So for a small business or any company, the way to approach a government customer or even the shipyards or large business is to lead with your capabilities and how you can help them accomplish their mission. Don't lead with, hey, I'm a woman-owned small business, what work do you have for me? Lead with what your capabilities are and how you can help them accomplish the mission, and you'd be better received. So have you been looking at restructuring the concept of program office management type support to be more episodic in nature and therefore more responsive and agile versus the standard FTE model where you have X number of contract support employees for 5 years?
So we're, I think in the wave of the future, if you just look at, hey, if we want to have a distributed Navy that's all digitally connected, you know, just having that done by separate stovepipe program offices is probably not going to work. So we're absolutely looking at what are the right models to get after that. We're also, here in the Naval Sea Systems Command, essentially moved or rotated all of our deputy PEOs, deputy program executive officers, almost simultaneously.
Whoa.
Over the last couple of weeks. And some of that is how do we, to really accelerate learning and get best practices out there. In terms of FTEs, I'm much more interested in hiring for capabilities than just, heads at seats kind of thing. That's challenging to do sometimes. And I'm looking for ideas, if you have better ideas out there on how we might do that.
Yeah, let us know. So we're going to wrap up in a few minutes. And so if you have any additional questions, send them our way. And as you're doing that, I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that are coming up and something that we just did the other day. Last week, I interviewed Mr. Jose Gonzalez, who is the Executive Director of DoD Human Capital Initiatives. And the topic was, attention small businesses, get the inside scoop, learn how to participate in the DoD's acquisition public-private talent exchange. And so since that event, several small businesses have reached out to Mr. Gonzalez and are going to participate in his weekly phone calls where he's working to select the next cohort. And 20% of the participants are supposed to, by law, come from small businesses. And I know there's challenges in that the small business has to pay the person's salary. So you're giving up somebody to the government. You've got to pay their salary and they're going to go work for the government for like 3 months to 2 years. But there's also benefits in that we could in turn send a government employee to that small business and you get to really understand the government. I know a lot of companies are concerned about, like, I don't understand why the government made that decision, or why does something take so long? Getting the inside scoop and being in there participating would really help companies understand that. So I hope small businesses will participate in that. The other thing that we have coming up is our office participates in Navy Weeks, and we're going to be in Oklahoma City on May 30th, Nashville on June 6th, Quad Cities, Iowa on June 27th, and Duluth, Minnesota on July 17th. So those are all good opportunities if you're not in this area to meet with a small business professional, and we advertise those events on our Facebook site. And the Department of Navy also works with NDIA, to National Defense Industrial Association, to host the Department of Navy Gold Coast Small Business Procurement Event. And that's the 24th through the 26th of July. And Mr. Jimmy Smith, who's taking over for me as the Small Business Director, will be there. You'll be there as well, speaking. And that's another good event. This year will be the 31st year. Last year was the 30th. And typically about 1,800 companies come to that, and that's in San Diego, California. And if you're in the DC area, and I'm not sure if they're broadcasting this live or not, but we have Seaside Chats at Naval X. And tomorrow night, there's a Seaside Chat, and this is in Alexandria. We've posted it on LinkedIn and our social media sites. But the topic is big opportunities for small business. Visit Naval X's headquarters in Alexandria near the Van Dorn Metro. Mm-hmm. And I'll be speaking, and so will Bob Smith, who's the director of the Department of Navy's SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research, Small Business Tech Transfer Program, and then Scott Bartlett, who's the program manager for the Department of Navy's Rapid Innovation Fund. And then one last thing that's coming up is tomorrow, and you may not think that you need to listen, but I would recommend you listen real time or later on, is to this Facebook Live. I'm going to be interviewing Mr. Barry Plunkett, who is the Assistant General Counsel in the Acquisition Integrity Office. Because in doing government contracting, there's lots of ways that you can get your company in trouble. You can get yourself in trouble, and I'm sure you'll hear from him that some companies find out that they did something wrong and they didn't even know it. So they're not out to get you. Or out to help you, and you can learn from past mistakes of other companies and employees, and you need to learn how some of these mistakes, like especially if you're debarred, how that impacts not only you, but it could impact other companies, other people in your company from doing business with the government, and how that might even impact your ability as a owner of that company to apply for government loans for your kids to go to college. There's direct implications of an acquisition integrity breach. So we'll talk about that tomorrow. So let's see if we have any other questions. Mr. Geurts asked a very enlightening question nearly 2 years ago that had significant opportunities in its wake, but it appears the question has simply been reabsorbed. The question was, what is the value of program designations of ACAT 3 and below? If these designations were removed, then we could certainly increase velocity and right-size processes to save resources, better serve the fleet and corps. Has there been any further consideration regarding this question, especially in light of the fact that many of these programs would fit in the model of the mid-tier acquisition programs for which many of the DoD 5000 and JSIDS regulations were then lifted? This would also seem to accelerate acquisition.
So I would say a couple of different things. So I've fairly early on published pretty direct guidance in terms of pushing decision-making down the chain, from the highest acquisition categories kind of all the way down, and continue to push that. My, I would say, experience thus far is it's not whether we call it an ACAT 3 or 4 or mid-tier acquisition that really drives a lot of the process. It's what's the mindset, the training level, and the culture with which that team is really performing. And so doing a lot of things to attack that. One of the products Naval X is building for us are playbooks of, say you want to do a mid-tier acquisition and you're a program manager, but you just don't know how. I don't want you to have to feel like you have to invent it. I want you to take the best practices from across the Navy and be able to adopt it. So I think that's the most important piece, is figuring out who's, getting your speed up the fastest, so you aren't having to learn from time zero. You can start with where we are currently as kind of state of the best practice. I think that will have the largest impact. Whether we call it an ACAT 3 or 4 or mid-tier acquisition, some of that other stuff, we'll keep looking at. There's kind of pluses and benefits on both sides of that. But I also don't think it's kind of like an either or. It's more of an either and. And then our real trick is how do we speed the tailoring of the specific program to whatever the need is, and then put all the tools in the tool chest, allow folks to go off and do that. So my sense right now is, and again, if you believe that, send me an email directly, that calling it a 3 or a 4 or mid-tier acquisition isn't necessarily driving the process as much as fixing the culture and making sure the team has access to the best tools.
Right. And sometimes, you know, a program manager might want to do something and they know how, but then they might have an attorney or a contracting officer that doesn't know how. So those playbooks will be helpful because they can hold that up and say, see, this is how it's been done before. And I think that'll really help.
And then I guess my ask of industry is, if you're seeing best practices somewhere else in one of the services in a different agency, again, I'm in the rip off and deploy mode.
Yep.
And so if somebody else has got it and you think it provides advantage in something we ought to look at, please get that to me either directly or through Ms. Harman there, and we'll take a look at it. So again, I'm not very smart. I'm a pretty good poacher.
One more, I guess it's a comment here. Someone's saying that international partners represent an additional challenge. Does this unduly lengthen the process of acquisition? I mean, that might present a challenge, but we definitely need our international
I think it's challenge and
partners.
opportunity.
Yeah.
And so I think it's, if you have a product that you believe has a potential to be sold internationally or service, thinking about that up front and talking about that, because there's some things you can do early on in the program that help set you up better for that.
Okay.
And so, you know, talking with your government counterpart about that and talking through the different steps is really important.
Okay. Well, I think that that wraps it up. Is it about, time to wrap it up? And I don't have any closing remarks. Do you? I've been
I would just, to everybody out there, thanks.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks for joining in here. I am sensitive to the fact that it costs money to come participate in things in person. And so we're doing everything we can think of how to enable sharing of data, discussions, everything else online. If you've got other ideas, please bring those forward. We're really looking to figure out how to get the best word out to everybody. And so if you have ideas there. And secondly, if you've not done work with the government or your Navy or Marine Corps, please figure out how to take advantage of research that we have in the small business environment, and look for opportunities to just get out and meet Marines and sailors and the other services. I worry sometimes as the percentage of the military compared to population declines, a lot of our issues are just communication and not understanding one another. So we're trying to come up with all the different mechanisms we can to close that kind of gap. But even if it's, I think sometimes there's a perception of the government or the users or our perception of small business. And the best way to cut through that is just having conversations. And so I just ask you to you make an effort on your side, we'll do on our side. If we can communicate better, build up a little of a shared understanding and trust, that will be the first necessary step for us really to rig for speed. If we don't do that and don't get rid of some of the bureaucratic waste and miscommunication, we are not going to be competitive as a nation, and I do not want to be in that spot.
Nope.
So things like this go a long way, and I'm open to other ideas you might have.
Yep. Thank you very much, everybody.